This is the story of a man whose stick-twirling, hard-hitting exploits kick-started a whole new musical genre.
He was the first guy in the neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, to actually do something and wind up on the Ed Sullivan's show. A lot of other guys did something, wound up in jail.
During his career, he has worked with Vanilla Fudge, Rod Stewart, Jeff Beck, Ozzy Osbourne, Pink Floyd, and Cactus.
It was amazing. The money, the drugs, and the women. Not necessarily in that order. It was a lot of fun.
He is the author of the world's most successful rock drumming book and is the man who bridged the gap between psychedelia and heavy rock.
You know, most guys were going boom, bap, boom, boom, bap, and Carmine was doing all his stuff. He took it to another level.
His flamboyant style is unquestionably unique, and it's been said that he set the foundation for heavy rock drumming before Bonham, before anyone else.
His impact on John Bonham. John took Carmine's sound and put his kind of, stamp on it, but I think the essence of it was Carmine's.
I'm Pete Mitchell, and this is the story of Carmine Appice.
We did it, and the Deep Purple got it from us, and so-and-so got it from them, and then before you know it, it's down the line, and it's Iron Maiden now.
Trying to track down a globe-trotting musician isn't easy, as Carmine now spends his time between homes in LA, New York, and Connecticut. But I managed to get a date in his diary and set off to New York, where we arranged to meet on the streets of the neighborhood where he spent his early days. So I'm at Delancey Street Station on the Lower East Side in Manhattan, and I'm about to go to Ditmas Avenue in Brooklyn to spend some time with one of the most inspirational rock and roll drummers in the history of rock and roll. I've managed to find my way to 40th Street in the heart of Brooklyn. I'm due to meet Carmine Appice inside the house he was brought up in, and I think I can see a rock star just along the way there. Hello.
Yeah, how you doing, man?
I'm good. So, where are we?
14th Avenue in Borough Park, Brooklyn, in front of a house that I grew up in. It looks like the current owners are pulling in right now.
They were casing the joint, did they?
Yeah, right. And this area here, these windows here, is where I used to practice, right in that little porch area with my drums. And I used to look out the window at little girls standing here watching me play, and I thought that was pretty cool, actually. And you could hear by all the background noise that you're on the streets of Brooklyn, New York. And then after a while, when I turned about 18 or 19, I got married for a few weeks.
Is it the police coming to get you, Carmine? They managed to caught up with you.
Yeah, I think they are.
After all this time.
So, I got married and actually moved upstairs. This is a two-family house, and I lived upstairs with my parents for probably 6 months, and then we ended up getting a divorce and an annulment, actually.
Was drumming your first love then?
Well, it became my first love. I really actually like chemistry a lot. I used to have a little laboratory.
You could have become a professor or a scientist, Carmine.
I could have been a chemist. Actually, my older brother became a chemist. But in this house on 41st and the house on 40th, both places I had little, what I called my little laboratory in the basement, and I had these 5-door chemistry sets and microscopes, and I used to get big cockroaches and dissect them and stuff, all kinds of weird stuff. Make gunpowder. In the other house, I thought it was a rocket, but it ended up being a little bomb and it blew up. My mother came running out. What's going on?
Was it a tough neighborhood then when you were growing up?
We had, this gang thing we had here. It was the 38th Street Park Boys, where, just all my friends. We used to hang at this park. It was a playground, and that's where we got the name of the gang from. But there was other gangs in the areas, and we used to have these fights, maybe 10 or 15 guys, fighting each other, and then it started getting really bad. They started making like these zip guns and chains and stuff, and when it started doing that, I started sort of bowing out because I didn't mind having a fight, fist fight, but when it started getting really hairy, I didn't want any part of killing people or any of that. So, and luckily at that age is when I started getting more into the drumming and more into the music, and probably it's one of the things that saved my life, There's a lot of my friends that were in that area, either got heavily drugged out, and a lot of them died of overdoses, or they ended up being in the mafia, and a lot of them got hurt and died in that. Some of them went in, the army in Vietnam, and I never heard of what happened to them.
You grew up here late 50s, early 60s?
Yeah, in this neighborhood it was totally different. The barbershop's gone, the candy store we used to hang out in is gone. This little grocery store is still here. It used to be called Joe's, and it's funny, the guy that used to deliver stuff, there was this helper boy, he owns the building now.
Right.
It's just pretty funny.
He's done well.
And he owns the building across the street as well, so he done well. And we used to listen to, like, let me see, late 50s, some doo-wop stuff, the Cadillacs and Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and the Channels. And it was my brother's music. He was 3 years older. And then the early 60s, like Motown and Topsy Part 2 by Cozy Cole, who was a drum single, and Wipeout and all that stuff.
Were you from a musical family then?
Well, not really. I mean, not immediately. There are other drummers in my family. My older cousin Joey was the first one. I was the second one. And there's actually 7 drummers in our family. You know, there's my brother Vinny, my cousin Tommy, my cousin Frank, and his brother Anthony, and another brother. All totals about 7 people. And yeah, but in my immediate family, there was no musical talent at all other than my mother singing when she washed the dishes.
I settled down to talk to the man who bridged the gap between psychedelia and heavy rock and kick-started a whole new musical genre.
Ever since I was little, you know, my brother played rock and roll on the radio when it was WINSF-AM, you know, which is now a big news station. It was a rock station with Alan Freed. I used to hear my brother, you know, listening to it in the kitchen. So I always had that, and then he played the records, the 45s, and, you know, and I used to like it. And then even before I was playing, I used to sing doo-wop in the subways, like Church Avenue, where you came in. I used to go down there and sing with singing groups when I was like 10 or 11 years old. It was, you know, I didn't sing lead, but I sang background. My brother showed me how to do harmony. So I was actually singing before I played drums.
This is a recording of Appice singing with his early band The Beats around 1964. Here is bandmate in The Beats, Phil Anastasi, who remembers those days back in Brooklyn fondly.
That house was a musical house. I mean, the mother and father were like really happy for them. You know, they were really into it, which was great. His father was proud of his mother. You know, it was great. I remember when he'd be like about 18, 19 years old, and he'd see a really good drummer, he'd take a pencil and paper and watch that guy and make little notes in his mind, or he'd see films of Buddy Rich and roll them in slow motion and watch what these. So you knew he was determined. You knew he was actually studying it. He just didn't sit down and started playing. Although he had that natural instinct, he had great independence of playing and personality. He was a strong force. He always had his eye on making it, and you could see he was going to go someplace.
Phil went on to change his name to Dean Parrish and had success with soul classics such as Skate and I'm on My Way. Appice & Co. precariously liven up their shows by lampooning the world's most successful band.
We used to play gigs in Brooklyn and goof on them. We bought Beatle wigs and changed the lyrics to nasty lyrics and goof on them. Come out and do a Beatles set, you know, with stupid Beatle wigs on, you know. And, you know, when they were done, I Want to Hold Your Hand, I was all poppy and garbage as far as I was concerned. You know, I was playing with Dean Parrish at the day, and we were doing R&B stuff with James Brown and cool stuff. But when the Beatles came out, I was like, oh, man, this is awful. You know, we're taking a step backwards. Then when they hit, like, the Revolver album, all of a sudden it was like, wow, what are these guys doing? You know, and everyone's starting to smoke pot and get into their heads and get into that album. And that album was like a Bible kind of thing, you know.
In 1966, his reputation began to grow, and whilst playing with local band Thursday's Children, members of the Pigeons, soon to be Vanilla Fudge, came looking for Appice. Here is bass player with Vanilla Fudge, Tim Bogert.
Well, it wasn't even called the Vanilla Fudge at that point. It was called the Pigeons. And the Vanilla Fudge name was coined after we had done the record because someone had already copywritten the Pigeons or had trademarked the Pigeons. The Vanilla Fudge band was playing a club called the Choo Choo Club in Garfield, New Jersey. And we had done a 10-week stint there. And on our next week off, we had no gigs. So we went back to the club just to say hi and hang out. And Carmine's band was playing there. And we thought, ooh, he's very good. And our drummer at the time wasn't working out. So we asked Carmine, would he like to join?
The guys from the Vanilla Fudge came into this club, the Choo Choo Club, and they were looking for a drummer, and they heard about me, and I was 19. It was a major decision for me to make, whether to stay with my friends and play gigs, take a chance with these news guys, and they wanted to, you know, make it in the record business, and that wasn't even an idea in my head. I just want to make a good living, you know, and have fun.
So the lineup was complete, along with Tim Bogert, Mark Steen and Vince Martell, and Carmine Appice on drums.
We saw it immediately when we went back to that nightclub. And he had a great feel, had a great foot, which was something our drummer was lacking at the time. And we thought, oh, this guy's great. Still is.
In 1967, Vanilla Fudge set about recording their debut single and album with the influential record producer Shadow Morton.
Well, Shadow was a producer in the early 60s that did some really creative songs with, like, the Shangri-Las. He did Leader of the Pack, and he did Give Him a Great Big Kiss, and all those songs incorporated sound effects and weird stuff in it, you know? Especially Leader of the Pack. They had motorcycles and echoes and all this weird stuff going on. And then he also did Janician. He did a lot of not normal kind of all that. I mean, he actually produced the New York Dolls' first album, which is off the wall, you know? What Shadow did was basically take our live show and put it on record.
The mid-60s was a golden period for music, and the Tamla Motown record label was having massive success.
Vanilla Fudge and all of the members and all my musician friends, pretty much, we all loved Motown. Motown and Atlantic were like the two cool R&B labels to listen to, you know, like in the rhythm section of Motown were people who rock musicians emulated. You know, the Supremes were definitely one of the groups we used to listen to.
In 1967, just a year after the Supremes had a worldwide hit with You Keep Me Hanging On, the Fudge decided that a cover version of the song would be their debut 45 release.
Tim Bogert and Mark Stone were in a car outside the Cheetah Club in New York, and it came on the radio. And I think Tim said, you know, this would be a great song slowed down, because it'd be better emotionally what the lyrics are saying. If it was slowed down, it was more hurting, as we used to call it. Gradually, the arrangements started coming together. We were playing a club in New York called Ungano's at the time, and we were playing 6 nights a week, so it was easy to come in the day and rehearse and then try it out that night. So by the end of the stay in Ungano's, we had this arrangement, You Keep Me Hanging On, that people were flipping out over in the clubs. You Keep Me Hanging On was done as a one-take demo, all together, vocals, everything was done at once. So I always said it was 7.5 minutes that changed my life.
Here is bass player with Vanilla Fudge, Tim Bogert.
It was a small studio in New York. It was a stereo studio, but we actually recorded it in mono, because a lot of things back then were still mono. Stereo was still new. And we recorded Hanging On in mono, and it's still on the record in mono.
Here's musician and editor of Modern Drummer magazine, Billy Amendola.
Everyone knew the Supreme song, You Keep Me Hanging On. That was a nice, light pop song. But when you heard the Fudge do it, that became a completely different song because of the heaviness of it. It just took on a whole different perspective and a whole different meaning, hearing it in that vein. Taking a song that was pretty popular and then doing it just as well, if not better and different, and having a whole different audience. Not too many people can do that.
Everyone remembered where they were when they first heard You Keep Me Hanging On. It was such a shocking song to everyone that, it was just an amazing time too. The times were great,
Younger brother Vinny Appice saw Carmine performing when he was a young boy. He would eventually go on to drum with Black Sabbath, Dio, John Lennon and Derringer.
I think You Keep Me Hanging On was just brilliant. I thought it was even better than the original in its own way. The original was pretty damn good too, but it just sounded like a totally different song, and it was just really, really clever the way they put that together. Very orchestrated, some great drum parts in there, and just really cool.
You Keep Me Hanging On became a worldwide hit, reaching the top 10 in the UK in 1967. Britain was the first country the band visited on their world tour.
We went right to Carnaby Street and bought clothes. I bought my first velvet jacket on Carnaby Street for, I think it was about 12 quid, $3 or $4 for that jacket. And it was unbelievable. I bought black velvet pants and the flowered shirts and the scarves, and wore that jacket on Ed Sullivan's show.
Now you're a heavy rock, soul-singing, psychedelic.
English Carnaby Street Wally.
It goes on.
Yeah, we went to England, came back with a whole new look.
That man has changed.
We look English.
Here is Tim Bogert.
It was amazing. The money, the drugs, and the women. Not necessarily in that order. Like the Wild West, yeah. There were no rules, and there was no precedent, so we just kind of made it up as we went along.
The debut album hit the top 10 in America. It included radical cover versions of the Beatles' Ticket to Ride and Eleanor Rigby.
Most people would do a song the way the Beatles did it, and we didn't. That's what made it interesting, like Eleanor Rigby especially. Some say it's sort of beginning of progressive rock, where we would marry different type signatures in it, and we did that a lot in a lot of our songs. When Tim Bogert did a bass solo, there was no bass solo like Tim Bogert's bass solo. It was totally theatrical, unique, crazy. Tim played with fuss tones sometimes, and we had the full array, and the bottom end of the keyboard. When you played some heavy stuff on there, when the keyboard and the bass, everyone kicked in, it was really heavy.
Here is musician and record label boss Randy Pratt.
music just kind of exploded. With that band, I thought it was like all of a sudden it was 3D instead of 2D, you know, it was magnificent instead of kind of nice, you know. Well, I used to say about the Vanilla Fudge, the world will never be innocent enough to be that blown away again, you know. I mean, it's been so heavy for so long now, it's like that you can never blow people's minds like that again, you know. It's been done.
Friend and drummer Bobby Rondinelli is currently playing with Black Sabbath. In the past, he was a member of Blue Oyster Cult and Rainbow.
Carmine didn't start me, but he certainly inspired me when I saw him. You know, I guess the Beatles made me want to be a musician, and you know, I thought, you know, Ringo was pretty cool until I saw guys like Carmine, and you know, Ringo's still cool, but you know, Carmine really made me. He was a big influence on me when I was a kid.
I heard that the Beatles approved of your cover versions.
They did, actually. George Harrison, and I got this right from Paul McCartney. I asked him about it. I said, was it true that George Harrison used to carry the Vanilla Fudge album around all over London to parties and stuff? He said, definitely true.
Vanilla Fudge made 2 appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show. It was then America's most popular entertainment show. Billy Amendola.
The first time I heard about the Vanilla Fudge was on Ed Sullivan's show. I believe I was 11 years old. And I saw Carmine twirling the stick, and I think that was the only opportunity that I had growing up to see a band was Ed Sullivan or maybe a variety show. We didn't have MTV or videos or anything like that, so to see someone on Ed Sullivan was a big thing. Yeah, I knew that he was something special from the first time I saw him. He played harder than anyone I've ever heard play before. He was a showman.
Here is Bobby Rondinelli.
Saw him on Ed Sullivan a few times, and then saw them at the Felt Forum, headlining with Buddy Rich opening, and Buddy was Buddy. He was insane, and Carmine came out on fire.
But you were a young boy at the time. Did you realize how good Carmine was even then?
Yeah, I mean, when you're a young kid, you know, if you see Mickey Mantle play baseball, you realize he's better than the other guy. So Carmine was like the Mickey Mantle of the drums back then. You know, most guys were going boom, bap, boom, boom, bap, and Carmine was doing all his stuff. And it was another. He took it to another level.
People Get Ready, the Curtis Mayfield song. Right. I know you're described as a progressive or a heavy rock outfit, but you were a soulful band as well. You're a soul guy.
All of us were soul guys. Vanilla Fudge sound was that, and which moved on to like Deep Purple and the heavy vibratos, which eventually came into the heavy metal. Everyone had that heavy vibrato because like we did it, and then Deep Purple got it from us, and you know, so-and-so got it from them, and then before you know it, it's down the line in Iron Maiden now. But we were basically R&B singers. People Get Ready was a message. It was a gospel-y kind of message, so we put the church organ to it, and you know, it starts off very soft and builds into this big orchestral kind of arrangement that had gospel sort of overtones to it.
Here is friend Rob Wallace of Hudson Music.
A real important band. The fusion of rock and kind of an R&B sound with a Hammond organ, to me, I was a big fan right away, you know, as soon as I had heard the band. You know, they kind of fused a little bit of the psychedelic, you know, vibe with some rock and some real, you know, kind of soulful playing, I thought. It was a, you know, real interesting combination.
His younger brother, Vinny Appice.
All the stuff he played on the first Fudge album, that was great. It was like orchestrated. It wasn't, he used the kit not as just a drum kit, as 2 and 4. He used it as a kind of percussion section, you know. It was great stuff on there. So I would say that first album is definitely the coolest piece.
The follow-up album, The Beat Goes On, recorded in 1968, failed to make its mark.
What we had to do was what we did on the first album, again, to probably, you know, get another platinum record. But we listened to Ahmet Ertegun, who's supposed to know what he was doing, and Shadow Morton, who was supposed to know what he was doing. And they did this concept album, but there was no music on the record. It was all, you know, voices in time with Hitler and Black Power, and it was depressing. When it came out, people in the West Coast played the whole record, and people listening to it who had taken acid were going on bummer trips and calling a radio station, telling them to take it off. And before you know it, you know, it sold, went number 15, but it didn't stay there because it was, you know, a weird album. They kept saying, you know, you'll be like the Beatles, you know. Everything was always like the Beatles. This is the best thing since the Beatles. And me, Tim, Phil were going, I don't know about this. This is weird. I don't know. This doesn't rock.
Despite the album's failings, the band were having massive success.
At one point in time, I think it was in '68 when Hanging On was released the second time, and we was touring with Jimi Hendrix, playing big arenas all around the country. We had 3 albums in the top 100, 2 of them in the top 20. So we had the first album like at number 18, Renaissance was like number 13, and Beat Goes On was number 80. And we had a single in the top 8. So that was great. If you had that now, forget about it. You'd be huge.
Were you rich from...
No, we weren't rich because the money wasn't really big yet. You know, I mean, we made decent money. Look, we made $1 million a year for a couple of years. And, you know, it wasn't a millionaire, but hey, we had really pissed away a lot of money by wrecking hotels, by flying everywhere, by carrying the equipment, carrying the roadies on planes. I mean, nobody knew back then. My big money started when Led Zeppelin started. Yeah, before the promoter would make all the money. And then when Zeppelin came out, they said, no, you make 10%, we make 90%. And then it switched around. That's when all the big money started.
Vanilla Fudge appeared at the Seattle Pop Festival in 1969. It turned out to be quite an experience. Here's Tim Bogert.
Back in the day when there were lots of festivals going on and there was still a lot of LSD going around, somebody spiked the drinks backstage and we were playing the Seattle Pop Festival and everybody got dosed with acid. And I remember it was getting on to sunset and the sun was just beginning to set behind the hills. There's about 100,000 people or more out there. We were doing Eleanor Rigby and it hit us all very hard right about that time. And I remember Mark singing the song and starting to cry. And it was good acid too, I may add.
After a morning of walking and talking along the leafy streets of Brooklyn, I was invited to the Gibson Studios in Midtown Manhattan to talk about Carmine's drumming idols and to see the maestro himself at work. So, as you can hear, behind the studio doors is one of the world's greatest drummers. We're going to go in and have a listen. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Carmine Appice.
Well, thank you all for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here in New York City with you, Carmine.
I was wondering what you were doing here.
So tell us about your early drumming influences here.
Well, I guess it was in like 1961, I got this album called Krupa and Rich. It was a drum battle. So those two guys, Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, became my drumming idols right then because the album was amazing. You know, people now when I do interviews, they say, what was the first album you ever bought? They're expecting me to say like the Beatles or something. And I go, oh, Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, you know. That album inspired me so much that I got a lot from each one of those guys. I got the fire and sort of viciousness from Buddy Rich, and I got a lot of the showmanship and melodic structures that I use from Gene Krupa.
Let's talk about Buddy Rich then. You got to play us a little bit. What was it about his playing?
Buddy was just an animal. He was just so fast and fiery, and he just had some great hands and feet combinations, you know. He was just probably one of the fastest drummers ever, you know, with his hands and feet combinations and hands. Single rolls are ridiculous. And so pretty much, you know, I got a lot of that kind of stuff from him.
Can you play us a touch of that?
Sure.
There we go, Buddy Rich. Tell us about Gene Krupa then.
Gene Krupa was a lot slower of a drummer, but a lot of showmanship, a lot of stick twirling, a lot of body language. You know, when he played, he put his whole heart and soul into it. When Buddy played, you know, he just sat there and it was just amazing, you know. He just sit there like a big, you know, animal. When Gene played, man, everything was moving. His arms, his shoulders, his head was bobbing around. And, you know, he became a sex idol. He became a pop star. He did all that stuff, which Buddy really didn't do. So between the both of them, you know, I came up with my thing. But Also, there was a movie in the early 60s that was the Gene Krupa story. And when I seen that movie, I was really inspired. I bought the soundtrack album to that. I learned every note, every drum note, and every note pretty much on the album. When it ended up on TV, I used to video it. Actually own the DVD now. So there's a lot of things that he did with the bands that I actually incorporated in some of my rock performances with different bands I used.
Can you play us a bit of Gene?
Yeah.
So there we have Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich.
And there was one more called Max Roach. Yeah, one more, which is... Max Roach was the one that gave me all the weird combinations between the hand and feet that eventually turned into a lot of my rock drum fills, which eventually ended up on like Stairway to Heaven and things like that. And that all basically came from Max Roach.
So can you show us what Max did as well?
Right.
What about the influence your drumming has had on the likes of John Bonham and Led Zepp? Do you think you invented the heavy rock genre or the progressive rock genre?
Well, the drumming style of rock drumming, what we consider today's rock drumming, came from 4 different drumming guys in 4 different bands. Ginger Baker in the Cream, Mitch Mitchell from Jimi Hendrix, Keith Moon, and Vanilla Fudge with me. I used to beat the drum so bad that I would dent the heads and break cymbal stands. I'd break everything. And then I went into a pawn shop one day and I saw this 26 bass drum sitting up there for $5. I said, you know what? I'm going to buy that because a bigger drum, louder. So I bought this big 26 bass drum. I recovered it myself to match my Red Sparkle kit that I used on You Keep Me Hanging On. On record, you can get away with making it sound bigger, but live, it was the volume thing. There were no PA systems then, I influenced John. And he told me I was his idol, and that when I met him, I said, man, I love that triplet thing you do on Good Times, Bad Times. He goes, what do you mean? I got it from you. I said, man, I don't do that. He said, yeah, you did. You did it on the first album. I said, I did? What I did was I was the only one that played loud, really hard. Ginger Baker was a jazz drummer. Mitch played like a jazz drummer. He didn't play hard. And Keith just played crazy. His approach was mad, like his life.
Rob Wallace.
I loved his sound, the way his drums sounded on everything I've heard. I love that big open bass drum sound. His impact on John Bonham. John took Carmine's sound and put his kind of, stamp on it. But I think the essence of it was Carmine's big open, snare drum, tom-toms, and bass drum sound. The John Bonham thing, I don't know if you could have a bigger disciple. I don't know what you'd call that person that kind of, certainly doesn't get any bigger than that. So, just that alone is an incredibly, important in the whole lineage of rock and roll music and rock and roll drumming.
Here is musician and singer with the reformed Cactus, Jimmy Coons.
I was such a huge Led Zeppelin fanatic that, then you backtrack and you go back and you see and you read all these things about how the only band that Led Zeppelin ever opened for was the Vanilla Fudge. And I know that Pagey and Robert Plant were huge Vanilla Fudge fans, and as well with the guys in Deep Purple and all of those iconic bands were, the template was they were drawn from the Fudge and Vanilla Fudge.
Here is Bobby Rondinelli.
When I was a kid, there were only a few guys. There was Ginger Baker, Dino Danelli from the Rascals, and Carmine. And Carmine, for me, was the number one. And then other guys came in like Bonham a little bit later, and Mitch Mitchell and people like that. But there wasn't many guys breaking ground. Not in rock, anyway.
Yeah. How influential do you think Carmine was then on what was to become heavy rock or progressive rock or whatever you call it?
Well, I know a lot of musicians say that, the Vanilla Fudge was, a lot of famous musicians. Vanilla Fudge was groundbreaking as a whole band. You know what I mean? They took it to different places. They had dynamics. They had energy. They had really great ability. When other bands were just playing, like, pop songs, these guys were doing some crazy stuff, and it still holds up. You listen to some of that old stuff, man, and it's just like, it still sounds great,
Vanilla Fudge played alongside many of the great musical acts of all time, including The Doors, Mamas and Papas, Led Zeppelin, of course, and Jimi Hendrix. Here's Tim Bogert again.
It was very inspiring. They were amazing bands, and we would watch them and take the good points of their show and incorporate it into ours. We stole from everyone we saw, which I think is the best compliment you can give someone. Hendrix, of course, was wonderful. I took a lot of stuff from him. Watched them all like a hawk. Eric used to let me sit behind Jimmy's amps during the show, and I would literally watch what he did and watch what worked and what impressed the crowd and then try to incorporate that into our show. Led Zeppelin was absolutely wonderful. They were very green at the time, and their first tour they were okay, and then they came back on their second tour and opened for us again, and then they were amazing. The transformation was like night and day. It was really quite amazing what they pulled off on the second tour. We did a show somewhere around Oklahoma City. I'm not exactly sure where it was because, again, it's a very long time ago. Zeppelin was opening for us, and they literally spent the crowd. They were so good that they just wore the crowd out, and we realized that. So I went out and announced to the audience that there's no way in hell we can possibly follow this, so we're not going to try. And we brought all the fellas out from Led Zeppelin, and all of us jammed for the next hour and a half, and it went over really well. We always wondered who would be the first band to, quote, knock us off, and it was Zeppelin.
In 1969, at a festival in Long Island, New York, the seeds of a new musical project were sown. On the bill that night were the Edwin Hawkins Singers, 10 years after, and the Jeff Beck Group featuring Rod Stewart and Cozy Powell.
So we were there, we hanging, and hanging with Jeff and Rod and Alvin Lee, and everybody's friends. And we had met Jeff a bunch of times in England, but nothing was ever mentioned about us playing together. That evening, while the Jeff Beck Group was on, Led Zeppelin showed up in full glory. Led Zeppelin was the hottest thing. They went up and jammed with the Jeff Beck Group. I remember rolling my drums out as well, and then John Bonham was playing either my kit or someone else's kit, and he stood up and took off all his clothes on the stage. He's totally nude. And my mother and father in the audience, and this is weird, And he comes off the stage, and we're going, great. And the audience now is going absolutely bananas berserk. So we're going, how are we going to follow this? So that was like, to me and Tim, the beginning of the end. We couldn't follow it. It was very difficult. We were up there, and we felt like, this is the new, out with the old, in with the new kind of vibe. And then after the show, John Bonham came up to us and told me and Tim, you guys should play with Jeff Beck. Jeff loves you guys. He wants to play with you guys. And we go, really? That's cool. And now Jeff Beck had the same attorney we had. Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, the Rascals, Herman's Hermits, the Yardbirds. We all had the same attorney, Steve Weiss. Almost family, you know what I mean? So Peter Graham worked with the attorney, so we started talking about us playing with Jeff Beck. Me, Tim, Jeff Beck, and Rod Stewart.
Like supergroup.
Unbelievable supergroup. And that was the fad then.
Why did it not happen?
Jeff got in a car accident, and he was unable to play or do anything for a year and a half. And then we found that Rod didn't want to play with Jeff. So then it ended up being like a press thing. I'll never play with that Wally again, and then it got bad, and they never worked together until people get ready that I helped instigate.
In 1970, with Vanilla Fudge disbanded and the Jeff Beck project on hold, the band Cactus formed. Along with Appice and Bogert, guitarist from Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels Jim McCarthy joined, with Rusty Day on vocals.
We tried to form the band around 1969, 1970, but Jeff had a very serious car accident at that time. So in the interim, Carmine and I put Cactus together and went out on the road with that. And then, a little while later, Jeff was better and said, let's form the group. And so we decided we'll give that a shot. And it was supposed to be Rod, Jeff, myself, and Carmine. But I think Rod and Jeff had personal problems, and Rod backed out. So we did it as a trio. And that worked for about 2 years, I suppose. And then that was over.
The lineup lasted for 3 years, producing 3 albums. Here is fan and the current lead singer with Cactus, Jimmy Coons.
I always liked the Fudge and was aware of the Fudge, but I was much more of a Cactus fan. My older brother had a couple of Cactus records, and I think what struck me about the band was, how they fired on all 4 cylinders was a pretty remarkable band, and plus being a frontman, lead singer myself. I love the riffs. I love Jim McCarty's style of playing guitar. It's straight ahead, no nonsense. He writes riffs from heaven. Timmy is a Carmine, but on the bass, and I'm lucky enough to be singing with him.
In 1972, Beck, Bogert and Appice finally got together. Tell me the story about Stevie Wonder's Superstition, then.
Well, the way I understood it, Jeff played on Stevie's Talking Book album. And then, in return, Stevie was supposed to write a song for Jeff. And the song was Superstition. I believe it was a Jeff riff. And he wrote the song, but he wasn't supposed to record it, Stevie, until Jeff got it out. So we recorded it with Beck, Bogert Appice. And while we were recording it, we just did it a rock way, slowed down. And then, just as we were mixing it, halfway through the recording, we find out that Stevie Wonder released it, and it went to #1. So Jeff and his people were really, really pissed off about it. So by the time ours came out, it was sort of like a Vanilla Fudge arrangement on it again. Here we go.
There we go, back to square one.
But it was still a big song on the record. The record probably sold 1 million units around the world.
Billy Amendola.
When I heard Beck, Bogert, and Appice, to me, that was one of my favorite records of the time to this day. I mean, that stuff comes on my iPod, and I just love it. I stop, I crank it up. I think it's one of the best of his playing.
Around this time, Appice started his drum school in New York and produced the most successful rock drumming manual, Realistic Rock.
I went into a Sam Ash music store, which is a music chain in America. At the time, they only had 1 or 2 stores, and I saw a drum book in there with, in '71, we all looked like hippies. We had the long hair, beards, and T-shirts, and I saw this guy on the cover of a book that had an Elvis Presley haircut, learned to play rock drums, and I looked at the book, I said, this guy is like played out. So I opened the book and looked at the material, and that's played out too. I said, you know what? I'm going to write a book. I got the technical skills to write. I'm going to write a book. I know rock like the back of my hand, So I wrote the book. It took me 30 days, and then we released it.
In 1976, Carmine joined the megastar Rod Stewart, where he would have his greatest commercial success.
I knew Rod through the Faces days because Cactus played a lot of shows with the Faces. So we did at least 3 or 4 months with them in America. And we all became good friends. So I knew Rod pretty well. And the way I got in Rod's band was by calling Rod's tour manager, Pete Buckland, who at the time was on tour with him. And I had heard that Rod went to 25 drummers in L.A. and he couldn't find anybody. So I called him and said, well, what about me, man? He says, well, you're always busy. I said, yeah, but I'd love to play with Rod. It'd be fun, It was great. 7 years, a lot of fun.
In 1979, he co-wrote what was to be Rod Stewart's most successful record.
See, in those days, I don't know how Rod is now, but in those days, Rod always trying to be cutting edge. Missing You by the Stones was big. He says, we need a song like that. I went home and I wrote the song, chords and stuff along the lines of Missing You. When we finally started recording with Tom Dowd and Andy Johns, it started out that way. We even had a conga player and we had a click and we kept recording it. And basically, when we did it with our band, we had 3 guitars, bass, keyboard, conga, and drums. It sounded pretty rock. It was pretty cool. But then little by little, Tom Dowd, the producer, put an orchestra on it and synthesizers and as you add more stuff on it, the track kept shrinking and shrinking.
It got lost somewhere.
Yeah, so before you know it, it became a real disco song instead of a rock song.
Do You Think I'm Sexy spent 4 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100 and topped the UK charts. In 1981, Appice co-wrote Young Turks for Stewart. It reached the top 5 in America and the top 10 in the UK.
Well, that was written by me and Dwayne Hitchings mostly, in Dwayne's studio, and we did it with a drum machine. Those were the days when drum machines were just starting to sound like real drums. So I went in and put hi-hat and cymbal crashes on it to make it sound a bit more authentic. But that was, I started seeing the direction of, it was getting a bit wimpy.
Still a successful record, though.
I know, big.
In 1982, he joined the wild man of rock, Ted Nugent.
He was different because he never did any drinking, no drugs, nothing. And he was pretty wild. So he didn't need any of that stuff. The way I got in his band was I think the beginning of 81, we did the American Music Awards with Rod Stewart and Ted. And Ted came up to me and said, when you're done playing wimpy rock and roll and you want to play a man's rock and roll, give me a call. So that stuck in my head. So when the thing with Rod, when we split up, actually, I called Ted. And I said, well, I think I'm ready to play some man's rock and roll. What do you think?
During 1983, Appice joined another legendary rock and roller, Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy was a really nice guy. Then he would drink and drink and drink. By the end of the night, he was oblivious. He'd forget lyrics, and it was Ozzy, just like the TV show. They asked me to get involved in finishing the album, so I was brought in as a associate producer to help mix the album in this studio here in America. When I came in, I was with Ozzy in New York City, me and Ozzy, and Sharon left Ozzy in my care, basically. We recorded here, and we did the last few vocals and mixed it. I helped with getting the drum sound and helped mix it, and that's where I got my credit from. And I actually had a share of the album as far as bonuses and stuff. And then I remember me and Ozzy flew to London on the SST. And when we got there, we went to an old asylum somewhere, and we cut the Bark at the Moon video. The band only played for the last 30 seconds or 40 seconds of the video. It was all about this story of Ozzy becoming a vampire, with that. It took him hours upon hours to get that makeup put on and everything. And it was, it was probably his most famous video. It was a lot of fun, and it was going great. We did the European tour. And when I got to America, I had told everyone, Sharon and everyone, that I do master classes. Master class is like a 30-person class that I would do before I went on stage, like a couple hours before. So I guess, my guess is Sharon didn't like all that because she fired me. So I started King Cobra. King Cobra really came about after I got fired from Ozzy, and I didn't know what to do. So took the approach the opposite of Motley Crue. They were all black-haired with a blonde lead singer. I was already black hair and had colors in my hair. So I said, let me get all blonde guys and put colors in their hair. So we did that, and it actually worked. And we did pretty well with King Cobra.
A year later, Vanilla Fudge reformed, releasing the album Mystery. In 1987, he joined the group KGB and played on Dogs of War, a track from Pink Floyd's Momentary Lapse of Reason album.
Bob Ezrin left me a message. He's a big producer, and said, Carmine, I'm doing this session, and I'd like you to play on just screaming for Carmine drum fills. I said, okay. So I called him back. I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm producing the new Pink Floyd album. I said, really? I said, you want me to play on Pink Floyd's album? So we set up a date, and I went down there, and that was it. I went down to a record store and I actually bought a cassette, and that was the first time I heard it. Was in this hotel room in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
In 1989, he dissolved King Cobra and joined John Sykes on his Blue Murder project. In 2003, he met his partner, talk show host Leslie Radio Chick Gold, live on air.
Ladies and gentlemen, standing in the spotlight without no doubt,
it's the Radio Chick.
The back is back, the back is back.
Carmine was a guest on my radio show. I was hosting a morning show at a classic rock station here in town. But I have to tell you, I didn't want him as a guest. He was pitched to me a few times, and I turned him down. So I didn't think he'd be a good guest. I didn't know much about him. I wasn't a fan. And I thought he would be boring and self-centered like most musicians.
Had you heard of Vanilla Fudge anyway?
Vaguely. I wasn't really a fan of him or his work, to be honest with you. But my producer finally prevailed upon me and said, no, Carmine Appice will be a good guest, especially here in New York City. Everybody knows him.
She didn't want me on the show, actually. Her producer's the one that said, you should bring Carmine on the show. So she booked me at 7:30 in the morning, figuring out I'm a rock star and I wouldn't come in. And I did.
Now, you probably know Carmine because he's a drummer for Vanilla Fudge. You may or may not know that Carmine has also played with Jeff Beck, Rod Stewart, Nugent, Ozzy, right? Wow. Who am I leaving out? Did I hit the high points?
And once we became a couple, I speak about my personal life on the air, and when Carmine became a big part of my personal life, he became a big subject on the show, which was hard for him. Rock stars are used to being worshipped, so hearing that you were lousy in bed...
It was weird. Yeah, I mean, this was even worse. We were driving back from Washington, D.C., and when she was on satellite radio, and I'm hearing on the radio that just describing the first night that we were together and how it wasn't, sexually wasn't that great, and that she never even orgasmed, but she faked it. All right, and I'm driving in the van with the rest of the band. Nice, and I'm going, yeah, this is nice.
My boyfriend is a rock star. It has been revealed that he had slept with 4,500 women before me.
To get back at him, he was scheduled to come on my show, one of several times he had been on, and we had just gone to a news station. He and a band that he loosely put together were going to be our first in-studio musical guests. They called themselves the Carmine Appice 10, but there were only 4 of them. His first number was the Radio Chick Blues, where he complained about being subject to public ridicule on my show.
Hey, I didn't know being your man would ruin my life. I love you, baby, but Lord have mercy. The first time we slept together, I thought it all went well. Then I heard on your radio show, I didn't ring your bell. Back on the tour bus, imagine my humiliation. station with my band, road crew, and manager.
He would complain about it afterwards, but Carmine loves attention.
My life on the street, I got the radio to blues. Yeah, I got my life on the street, I got the radio chick blues.
The ever-so-youthful Appice still travels the world for kicks with his sticks and still plays with the reformed Vanilla Fudge and Cactus. His current project is Slam. Here is Z from the band.
There's 5 drummers, and we basically play on unconventional items that you find, in garbage cans, from buckets to anything like from ironing boards that you would have in your house. We pretty much make music out of everything. It's very different, but I think that's what Carmine brings. It's his big strength, which is his drum set, rock and roll drum set playing. It's basically an onstage carnival. It's complete fun from the minute we hit to the minute we stop. It's more of a drum ensemble, which is a group. There's all drummers.
It's a theatrical rock show with 5 drummers and a guitar player where we actually play rock music, and we play it on trash cans and buckets and all this other stuff. We sell out smaller venues, but it's still as exciting, When you play B.B. King's, they sell out and the people are going crazy.
Billy Amendola.
It's really an entertaining show. The guys and girls that Carmine picked out for this not only are they entertaining, they are all great players. So for me, when I went to see this show, it's a cross between Stomp and Blue Man Group, but it's a little bit more than that because, number one, you have Carmine.
Well, we're here back in Brooklyn, where you were born. What is it like now, looking back on the career that's, it must have seemed like forever. You started in '66. Can you look back and appraise it, or is it really difficult?
Well, it's difficult to do that, but because I haven't been in a situation like, so many drummers where they're with one group for 40 years or 30 years, and they go out and play arenas once every 18 months, and you know exactly what life is going to be like. You release an album, you do another arena tour, and then you go home for a year. My career's never been like that, It's been up, it's been down, it's been playing arenas, it's been playing theaters, playing clubs, doing clinics. I always had to look to the next thing for me to do. I've had a lot of great times, and luckily worldwide. This mug has been around 40 years, It's
going to be around for another 40 years, hopefully.
That would be interesting.
It's amazing. I don't know how many other drummers around that have the longevity. 5 decades of top level, kind of at the top of his game playing and performance.
He's a very smart businessman. He's very, very good. A great musician, anyone can tell. He's really a down-to-earth guy.
He's got a youthful exuberance about him, and I think that he never lost that inner child and that inner spark of creativity, and he's one of the most driven people that I've ever met in my life.
I think he's very influential for being one of the pioneers of a lot of things back in the 60s when he started. He had oversized drums. He was the first one to use those drums, and nobody saw anything like that. And then he was twirling the sticks and not playing it safe. No 2 and 4 there, just being really aggressive, which was great.
Every time I see Carmine, he'll whip out something new, and it's still exciting, and it's fresh. It's about not being afraid to take a chance, and it's about not being safe, pushing the envelope a little, and Carmine is always doing that. His bands have, been influential on the music scene, period, with the Fudge and Cactus and Jeff Beck, Bogert Appice. So he's been very influential, but on drumming, he's one of the few guys you know by the first name.
So, the beat goes on and on. I'm Pete Mitchell, and this has been a Radio 2 production for the BBC.